If you're looking for my detailed thoughts on either of these games, you'll want to watch the review videos I posted previously. You can find them in the Dreamcast Era Sonic Marathon playlist. Once again, I elected to separate the reviews and the version differences into separate videos because integrating them with the main reviews would have saddled you guys with a pair of 50-minute long videos. And I personally would never want to watch a single review that is that long, unless if it comes from a content creator I really like.
Oh, shucks, dude. Making this series of videos has not been easy. I'd originally planned for these parts to be uploaded a week or so apart from each other, but they got longer and longer until I started releasing them a month or so apart, and yeah, there's a reason for that. Many years ago, in the earlier days of YouTube, I made Sonic reviews for my original channel where I expressed, for the time, pretty controversial opinions, and that's kinda how I got my start on YouTube. I say I was jumping on a bandwagon, but there wasn't really a bandwagon for the kinds of things I was saying back then. I wasn't complaining about the way Sonic looked or whatever you might think. I was just focused on how the level design of Sonic had changed over the years and what I felt was missing from some of the later games. I was new to making videos, and I was young and didn't have the most informed worldview at the time. So now and then I've looked back at those older videos with growing distaste, wondering why the heck I thought it was a good idea to say some of the things that I said back then. Some of those older videos I can barely sit through a minute of anymore. They're not even worth reminiscing about for old time's sake. I won't delete them. I still feel they're worth leaving up, if only to show how much I've changed since I first talked about these games. But my thoughts and feelings have evolved a lot over the years, enough that I feel the need to take another swing at them, and release new reviews that more accurately reflect my opinions nowadays. I won't revisit all of these games though. There are other series I want to get to. But I felt like stepping up for Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 because they're kinda special to me, and not in that rose-tinted nostalgic way. More like I somehow appreciate them more as time goes by and I begin to notice more new things about them. Back when I was new to this, games like Sonic Adventure weren't so over-reviewed as they are now, and were looked upon more favorably. Somewhere down the line, things changed, and now these games are regarded as irredeemable pieces of shit, and anyone who likes them is just a sad, delusional fanbrat who hasn't played enough good games to know any better. People like to say all the time that, oh, we were just kids at the time who weren't as discerning or enlightened as we are now, to justify this huge revision of history, this sudden widespread shifting of attitudes, and as cynical as the outlook I'm about to express is, I blame it mostly on bigger YouTubers and so-called game journalists. Not for informing the people of some truth I'd rather them not be aware of, but for injecting too much of their own biases into their work and passing it off as some sort of law. There are reasons for them doing this. It's probably because of the rapid-fire format of a lot of these reviews. These bigger YouTubers release videos every couple of weeks, in some cases even weekly, so these videos don't tend to be terribly long like mine sometimes do. They just want to get their thoughts out there, entertain people for a few minutes and call it a week. Bingo, bango, done. And there's nothing wrong with that, it's fine for simpler games, but Sonic games, especially ones from the Dreamcast era, are really complicated, and it's hard to do them justice without really dissecting them, which these YouTube game reviewers, for one reason or another, can't. They don't have time to talk about how Tails and Eggman's mechs have a waist swivel that enables them to aim and point at enemies faster than the legs turn or other nifty shit like that. All they can really afford to say is this is clunky and shitty, and leave it at that. They're just really vague most of the time, and don't give you any well-articulated concerns or specific reasons for why they feel the way they do. You're just expected to take it at face value and soak it in. And unfortunately, that's a standard when it comes to game reviews on this site. See, there have been times when I've questioned whether I go too in-depth with these reviews for my own good, lovingly dissecting all the little game mechanics in exhausting detail when I should probably just get to the point and tell people whether I think the game is good or not and not bore them. But then I get comments from people saying they appreciate that I even notice the finer details of these games. They find it refreshing that I take the time to note these things that they've always appreciated too, and I guess that's one thing that makes my videos stand out. When guys like ProJared or whoever make their reviews of these games, they have to be quick and snappy so that they can get to the next game already. But then you've got guys like Matthew Matosis who are the complete opposite. His videos are pretty long and super informative. He also makes little series out of them, like I've done with the adventure games, showing how trends change with the game's releases. He doesn't release videos very often, but that's okay because people know they're in for a treat when he does, that he's worked really hard on putting something great together that'll make you think about things that you probably never would have had the chance to think about otherwise. It's treated like an event. Then you have stuff that's kind of in the middle, like Sequelitis and similar things. You have these videos where people talk about series like Mario or Zelda or Mega Man or Metroid or Pokemon or Metal Gear with the same time, energy, and care put into them that I've tried to put into these videos. The problem is that people don't think Sonic is worthy of being talked about the same way these other games are. They don't think it's worth taking the time to carefully pick them apart all the while being fair and just giving everything a chance. It's like, Yeah, there are some good Sonic games, but they're so few and far between, they're not really noteworthy, you know? The series in general is so broken, it's easier to just lump all these games together in one big mess. Please, just fuck that noise. I hate seeing any game series treated this way, just completely dismissed as worthless. Every even somewhat competently made game deserves its fair shake, no matter what series it comes from. Sonic is no exception. It's just been made the butt of all jokes in the punching bag of the gaming world because, well, it's something that Aaron said that I find unusually insightful coming from him. That Sonic is such a fun character that people can't stop talking about him. But no matter how much they love him, it's just too much fun to shit on him. So people are always gonna do it because, yeah, being negative is fun, and things like Sonic give them an excuse to be negative, an outlet. I see a lot of YouTubers who thrive on being negative all the time, and when they present a solution to the problems they bring up or keep things in the context of some bigger picture, as some do, then great, they have something valuable and constructive to say. They actually start discussions that go back and forth and result in something positive. But then there are those who aren't here to change anything, who may as well be screaming at a wall and do it because they think it's lulz worthy. It's kinda sad. But you know, I don't want to make it out to be all black and white. For all the things I disagree with in Pro Jared's review, I can still appreciate it because it does give me some sense that what he says is out of some genuine goodwill towards the Sonic series, that he wants to see it improve, unlike other guys who make it sound like they just want Sonic to disappear forever. Then there's guys like Jimmy WHETZEL. I don't want to be mean, but I have to be frank. This is one of the worst Sonic Adventure reviews I have ever seen since joining YouTube nearly a decade ago. It's so uninformative. He barely talks about the gameplay. It's mostly a 10-minute plot summary where he just dismisses the entire game as crap. He comes to the part where you fly and tails his plane and sums it up with one word: shitty. He doesn't elaborate. He doesn't talk about how it controls, or the lock-on mechanic, or the music that plays during this part, or the camera angles. He doesn't say anything that really justifies hand-waving the entire section as shitty in all of a second. He just does it like saying it makes it true, and that's all you should expect from anyone reviewing games on YouTube. There's nothing deeper to it than that. He just doesn't think Sonic Adventure deserves to be talked about like a normal game. It doesn't have that dignity. This has all the hallmarks, all the symptoms of how people are taught to review games on YouTube nowadays, and I really don't see the appeal of this style of reviewing. I know some people really like it, and I know it's not supposed to be taken seriously as an actual game analysis, but that's the problem. It makes me wonder what the point of even making a game review in this style is. I just don't understand it, it's weird to me. I think reviewers should strive to be informative and back up their claims, rather than just laying the game bare for all to see and expecting it to be so obvious, so readily apparent why something is as awful as they say.
Because Knuckles is the sworn protector of the Emerald, he's gotta go around and recover all the pieces in scavenger hunting type levels. That sounds so fun! Is there even a way they could mess that up? Yes, there is, and they managed to find it.
Come on, Jimmy, don't stop there. Now you've got me really curious. I'm sorry for targeting this video, and this creator specifically. I'm not trying to start a war with him or whatever. I just found this to be a perfect textbook example of the complete polar opposite of what guys like me are trying to accomplish by reviewing games in videos like ours. And people can say all they want that they don't take videos like these seriously, but for every person who says that, there's gotta be like 100 people who actually do take it seriously and repeat the things these reviewers say like gospel everywhere the subject is brought up because it makes them feel smart or edgy or whatever. Some people just don't understand the insane power bigger YouTubers like EGORAPTOR and Pro Jared do have to sway the masses, to single-handedly change attitudes towards a game basically overnight. I mean, people are starting to say that Sonic 06 is way better than either Sonic Adventure game, that it's the Sonic Adventure series done right. Are you kidding me? I feel like I stepped into the Twilight Zone, it's so warped. All it took was a few reviews from the right people bashing these games to completely ruin them in the eyes of the internet, and now you can't talk about them without some caveat justifying your right to enjoy these games and not be called a retard for it, in spite of what the bigger YouTubers say. They don't deserve the authority we give them, and you know what? I don't think they even really want it. At least not all of them. A lot of these guys just want to talk about games. They all started small, they all started with 0 subscribers, they all started somewhere, and I'm sure most of them didn't set out to get big and change perceptions and attitudes towards any given series on any huge scale, but I bet some of them do. I would not put it past some of these bigger guys to think that Sonic and his popularity are just bad and cancerous for gaming and need to be stopped. Someone out there is definitely thinking, I can't believe people actually enjoy this. It's up to me to nudge people in a better direction, away from shit like this, because I read books on game design, so I'm smart. I'll show them the truth, and soon they'll all hate these awful games as much as I always have. I've gone on about that long enough. Before I go any further off the deep end, let's actually talk about the games themselves for a minute. We'll get back to this. Since I started releasing these videos, some things have come up that I wasn't sure about before, and I feel like bringing these things to light. For example, Paradigm Gamer informed me that all versions of Sonic Adventure 1 are fairly glitchy. The DX version is still a little glitchier, and has some instances that don't appear in the Dreamcast version, but it's never been ideal. The difference is marginal, almost negligible even. I was also informed by multiple people that there is indeed a special trick for catching fish in big stages. You just press down when the lure's in their mouth, and you win the game. Huh. I don't know how I forgot that. I was also told that the real reason for Big's inclusion wasn't necessarily to justify the Dreamcast fishing add-on, but to show off their water effects that were apparently mind-blowingly amazing for a time. They needed an excuse to force you to look at the water for a long time, so they made an entire playstyle around it. Wow. If this is true, I don't even. Interestingly, another friend of mine, Well Wester, brought a theory to my attention that the military knew all along that Sonic wasn't the Hedgehog running amok committing crimes, but they told the public that he was so they wouldn't be made aware of Shadow. So they weren't stupid, it was just a desperate cover-up, and chances are not many other civilians actually fell for it anyway. Then again, they did see Sonic turn gold in the previous game, so why should they be surprised that he can apparently turn other colors too? Now it all makes sense, or at least a little more than it did. Also, I was dead wrong about not being able to bring animals dropped by Bannox into the Chao Gardens in Sonic Adventure 2, or losing the Chao World Key after getting hit in the main stages. I don't know what I was thinking at the time. Also, if Chaos Drives are indeed a man-made substance designed to produce Chaos Energy like Chaos Emeralds do, I wonder if Tails was able to make his own complete counterfeit emerald by perfecting whatever process makes this, or if he came up with his own process that's superior. Yes, this is the kind of stuff that interests me in these games. You see, this is why it's good that I made this a series. If I only made 1 or 2 videos about Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 together, I wouldn't have the chance to correct whatever missteps I've made along the way, some of which I even corrected in later parts before this. They'd just be there forever for people to see and think I'm a moron who doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, clearly I don't all the time, but I like to think that I do most of the time. I just don't want to have to come back and make another update for these videos years after this one. Anyway, Sonic Adventure hasn't aged very well and there's a lot of needless faff tacked onto it, yeah, but if people really don't give a shit about the other characters or the story like they say they don't, at least at its core there's still a perfectly passable 3D Sonic experience that was good for a first try and yes, is pretty darn fun. 10 levels, some cool bosses, and even some of that good old classic Sonic feel in the visuals and music and some of the stage design. I've already gone over how most of the other playstyles aren't all that horrible in other parts, so I won't repeat myself here. If the Sonic campaign truly is the only part of the game that you find remotely bearable, guess what? It's there, and it's the one you start the game with by default. So just play that and ignore the rest of the game if you really hate it that much. And Sonic Adventure 2, for all its faults, isn't the piece of crap that hypercritical and negative gaming critics have decried it as. And even back when I was going through that whole phase myself, I never thought it was shit. It's more like I felt it was somehow wrong for me to enjoy the game as a whole. That something was wrong with me. That I shouldn't, that I can't support the decisions they made with this game. Can you believe that shit? The idea that it's bad to just play a game and have fun with it? I'm sure you've all felt it too. When did this happen? I've seen the Sonic fanbase come under attack for this, for playing the wrong games over the last decade and supporting tripe. As they say,
"We bet you could see this one coming, but seriously, we mean this. Sonic can die. We don't need to hear about how Sonic Generations and Sonic Colors are actually pretty good. These are delusions."
Actually, I feel kinda bad for game trailers now. They're shutting down as I write this. I mean, come on, just because they made that one video doesn't mean I'm gonna celebrate people losing their jobs. And as controversial as this may sound to some, I hope that whoever's running the Sonic the Hedgehog Twitter account doesn't lose their job because they made one mistake and posted a stupid insensitive tweet of a stupid insensitive old meme. If someone does lose their job over something like that, and that makes you happy, you're just an intolerant bully who doesn't give people any room for error, which is a bit of a problem considering how horribly flawed humans are, and how prone we are to frequently slipping up and saying stupid things that we may regret in hindsight. One insensitive tweet doesn't warrant saying, "I hope this guy gets fired." If you honestly want that, if you see that as righteous, you are not a nice person, and you think only certain people should be given compassion or the benefit of the doubt. Anyway, sorry for going on that tangent. It's just a thing that came up. Anyway, going back to that whole thing about supporting the wrong things. Recently, I have grown to despise the whole concept of guilty pleasures. I know what it means, and it didn't used to bother me, but it's so belittling. That word, guilty. It feels like you're actually being accused of doing something wrong. Like, you should know better than to find enjoyment in something like that, or you should be above that. For shame. It's so toxic when used that way, at least to me. Hence why I rarely use it to address other people. I don't want to put them down for enjoying something I don't get. Just let them. It's not like they're going to destroy the world if they don't get punished for enjoying what they do. It's only when people fail to look beyond arm's length and seem confounded that anyone wouldn't enjoy the things they do that they start to get obnoxious. Maybe there's something that makes your guilty pleasure special to you that other people can't see, and they shouldn't make you feel stupid for it. Just don't try to make them feel stupid either. Anyway, while it isn't completely untrue that Sonic fans may be a little too forgiving for their own good and sometimes support things that are legitimately subpar to say the least, when it comes to Sonic Adventure 2, it's a Sonic game. It's ambitious, it's polarizing, it's confusing, it makes people feel conflicted. It just isn't for everybody, and as different as it is, my general assessment of the first Sonic Adventure's charm, what keeps people coming back to it, still sort of applies to this game as well, maybe more so. Bottom line, I just can't call a game like this awful or horrible or shitty in good faith. I'd be lying to myself. You can say I'm delusional or have shit taste all you want, but I won't stop you. I've had my say on these games. There's something else though, a larger issue I've been meaning to talk about, and it goes back to that general attitude about Sonic just being too broken to take seriously at all. See, there comes a point where you really have to ask, was Sonic ever any good? And some would say, no. They have always been bad games, even the classics. They're gimmicky and shallow and dumb and spit in the face of game design by their very nature. The very idea of Sonic is conceptually broken and should never have made it onto a game cartridge. These are the kind of people who go to the Mario school of game design, who seem to think that there's only one right way to make a game, and anything that deviates from that, even a little bit, is subpar. Part of why so many Sonic games turn out the way they do is because they don't stick to any one formula long enough to really develop a concrete playstyle to the fullest and work out all of the kinks. They're very experimental, even a little too much for their own good. But Mario is the complete opposite of that, and for the most part, I'd say it's a good thing. But I still have some gripes with his games. Mario 64 is a very clunky game. It's kind of an acquired taste. That said, I still really like it. In fact, I like it much more now than I did as a kid. I find this game so charming for how experimental and daring it was, how rough around the edges it is. I especially like the controls and how you can play fast and loose with them, and take risks that sometimes fail horribly, but oftentimes pay off in some really cool way that makes me think, yeah, I did that. Simple things like long jumping are so satisfying in this game. Let's compare it to Super Mario 3D World. Make no mistake, I love this game. I love it. But I don't love everything about it. I feel a lot of Mario's moves, long jumping included, are kind of nerfed in more recent games like these. You can't really play fast and loose in a game like this like you could in older, sloppier games like Mario 64 because everything has a much more clearly defined arc, and while it functions perfectly, it ends up feeling kind of robotic to me. A little less flexible, a little less organic and stretchy, a little less variable. It's not my favorite control scheme. I feel it's limiting in some ways, but that's just talking controls. I think the level design and co-op gameplay make up for it in this game's case. But now let's look at some of his older games, like Super Mario Bros. Wii. I'd like to compare the use of power-ups in this game to the use of power-ups in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. In Super Mario Bros. Wii, there are so many levels that feel like just that. Levels. Artificial. Overly planned out. There are so many places where you're clearly supposed to use the ice flower at all times or some other power-up, and the entire level will be focused on that, and they keep handing you more and more of that power-up throughout the stage, in case you've lost it along the way. Even in the barrel ones like Super Mario Galaxy, they'll have a bit where the only way you can proceed is by killing a bunch of mooks, and this will be one of the few instances where you ever get an invincibility star. Gee, what a convenient and carefully planned out scenario this is. You see what I mean? It's trying to look so smart by doing the most obvious basic shit. This is what people call good game design, but I just find it predictable and repetitive, even kind of forced and contrived. Looking at Sonic 3K though, in this two-part game, none of these shield power-ups are necessary to make it through any one part of the game. As nice as it is to have the bubble shield and breathe underwater, you don't need it. It makes things easier, but if you don't have it, no problem. You can still make it through these underwater sections by popping bubbles as they float up and get extra air from them. The game doesn't expect you to have a shield and give you handouts if you don't because the level design is broken without it. Just go! And as nice as it is to have the fire shield and protection from fire in places like Lava Reef, you don't need that either, because there are always safe platforms for you to jump and stand on. The landing shield is good for pulling rings to you, and it's nice to have that extra jump, but again, these are completely unnecessary. They don't disrupt the flow of the gameplay to give you a bubble shield themed level, or a lightning shield level, or a fire shield level where that's all you use in some over-constructed challenge. And some people criticize the game for that. They think it's frivolous and unneeded and poorly thought out. I'll let these guys take it from here for a few minutes because they hit the nail on the head.
I recently read an article about a Nintendo fan who argued even the classic Sonic games were very badly programmed games, and we notice more and more that these games are under fire. Now, I won't go too in depth about the article, but there was one argument that perfectly demonstrates the difference between the Sega state of mind and the Nintendo state of mind. Everyone loves the power-ups, right? Awesome how Tails can fly Sonic up in the air, and those fantastic elemental shields. Sonic is all on fire and can speed up faster, or the electric shield that has all the rings fly towards Sonic and gives you a double jump. All Sonic fans love those power-ups and are always happy to see them return. All except this article that stated they're useless. Now, not entirely useless, they assist and empower Sonic a little. All of them have minor advantages, but the article stated none of them are ever vital. Sure, the bubble shield makes going underwater easier, but it's never really the difference between life and death, just a minor convenience. It's cool Sonic can speed up with the fire shield, or that it protects you against fire. But is there ever a part where you have to use the shield in order to get a power-up or get through a difficult part? Is there ever a moment in the game where losing the power-up makes you unable to go anywhere? The shields empower and are convenient, but rarely really vital. In fact, sometimes they're almost entirely pointless, like in Flying Battery Zone, where you get the electric shield for one bit to get a lot of rings, but after that first section, the rest of the stage takes place in claustrophobic corridors, so the double jump the electric shield contains is entirely useless. Even the one section that takes place outside has absolutely no part where the double jump is even remotely helpful. Now, play a game like Mario where power-ups have a much bigger impact. Well, sure, also plenty of moments where they're not super relevant, but there are more than a few moments where the difference between having, say, a frog suit or not are life and death. If you get a leaf or cape, you can bet there will be tricky platform sections. Getting a fire flower is usually immediately followed by tons of enemies. If a Mario game hands you a power-up, you can bet it will be instrumental for the upcoming sections, and not just a fun convenience. The further you go in the Mario series, the more power-ups are directly connected to the level design. And that's not even talking about games like Zelda or Luigi's Mansion, where every item or power-up you get is essential to your puzzle solving. In fact, often there are puzzles where you have to find entirely new twists and ways how you use the items. Sega also has a few games where power-ups are essential, but much more than with Nintendo games. They're just conveniences. You get a little extra time, can beat up opponents a little more convenient. Extra help, a feeling of empowerment, but rarely utterly important.
So what's the problem? That's awesome! Power-ups in these games aren't tasks or challenges, they're empowerment. They strengthen the core of the game instead of distracting from it. Yeah, Sega often employs power-ups and items that don't have a direct purpose, but just make you a little more powerful and let you earn more points. Which I like, it gives me freedom. Sonic is about freedom. When I get power up as Sonic I feel awesome. Ooh, more power, I'm extra strong. In a Zelda game I'm paranoid and scared of items. And god damn, another puzzle's coming. To me they distract from the core energy of the game. Run around and hitting enemies in their stupid faces with my awesome sword. But oh damn, I walk into a room and see all the torches need to be lit and blocks to be pushed and here we go doing stupid junk again. With Sonic, getting a power never interrupts the core gameplay. I'm kicking ass, get extra powers, and I'm still kicking ass. Get the power up and I'll get some extra rings or die less from water. Awesome! Lose power up, well, whatever, a little more difficult, but I can still kick butt. But play Yoshi's Island and there's the helicopter. Guess I have to be a stupid helicopter now. I'm playing Luigi's Mansion, fighting ghosts and having a good time, but oops, door's locked. Guess I have to vacuum clean every corner. And flash the light desperately in order to find whatever stupid thing the game wants me to do to progress. It stops the action.
But that's the point of these games, you imbecile! What's a Zelda game without puzzles? What's a horror game without exploration?
Right. We did put Nintendo's more puzzle games against Sega's more arcade games, so the comparison is a little unfair.
But they do give us a pure example of how their usual way of thinking works.
Nintendo is very methodical. Everything has a very clear, specific purpose. With Mario, power-ups are carefully planned when you need them. Levels are very clear and strict. Here's where you are, here's the goal, here are the obstacles. Now you need to do these things, these specific things in order to get through it. Everything is set up very carefully. Sonic, on the other hand, is much more sloppy. Just a bunch of things happen. Woo, go here, woo, go there. I'm hit, whatever, lose some ring. I can get half of them back and whatever. Here's another bunch of rings. There's this segment here in the desert stage where you get an invincibility, and then there's absolutely no enemies or danger for a long time. So you think it's pointless until you discover all the way at the end of the track that you fall into a pit with spikes. So you're supposed to get there before your invincibility runs out. But you know what? I didn't even notice this, because even when I don't have invincibility, whatever, I'd lose some rings. Moving on. You're a tank, just knocking into things.
Very barbaric compared to Nintendo. The only messy Nintendo franchises I can think of are Star Fox and Smash Brothers. Those two are the least Nintendo-esque and have much more of the arcade mentality of Sega. Lots of sound effects and energy and chaos and adrenaline pumping action. But outside of those two, Nintendo games are often very careful.
Yeah, really? Nintendo would never have a game where you're a taxi cab crashing into people and buildings for money and points. Well, okay, there's Mario Kart and... Okay, there's a lot of overlapping then. And Sega has a few more methodical games like Nintendo has. Yeah, definitely a few Sega games that feel like a Nintendo game. So okay, overlapping. It's not black and white. But generally, when Nintendo and Sega are at their most pure, Sega's cool and messy and trendy, and Nintendo's atmospheric and methodical. Which is why Sonic Colors was such an enormous departure from classic Sonic. It's much more Nintendo-minded. Its power-ups are very specific challenges, specifically set up in order to get rewards. No longer emblems or moonstones or red coins randomly scattered through the level. Now everything is a carefully calculated challenge. Here's Rocket Wisp, you have to do rocket thing to solve the next puzzle. Drill Wisp, there's a drill puzzle here. Which is why people more gravitating toward Nintendo games love that game, and I hate it. Power-ups aren't just cool, awesome things to make me feel empowered anymore. They're harbingers of puzzles and pace-interrupting challenges. No longer, yay, I have fire powers now! But, my exciting adventures put on hold again, because I have to do something stupid with the Float Wisp again. The only Sonic games I remember with carefully planned power-ups is Sonic 2. Probably why it's the most popular amongst Nintendo friends from the classics. Play the game right, and you barely even see power-ups. They're all deliberately put in places where only if you suck at a game would appear. Deliberately planned to help newcomers, but out of the way for experts. So yeah, I like optional freedom and power-ups, just there for me to play with without having to worry about them. Sprawling and open environments for me to choose to which path I take with little consequence. Well, as long as the actual inconsequential freedom and the open sections aren't a deliberate part of the challenge. At least give me a radar if I have to search for junk.
I feel it was important to share what these guys had to say, because this is where I first really started thinking about stuff like the shields and Sonic game design in general. They've also recently uploaded a video about fun, which delves into the mindset some of the harsher critics out there seem to have adopted. It's a good listen at least. Point is, going back to more modern Nintendo games, and even the more Mario-like Sonic games like Sonic Colors, I do think there is a point where a game can become too polished, too refined, too spotless, too immaculate, too shiny, too planned, too directed, too restrictive, too rigid, too clean, too perfect, where you're basically being corralled into doing what the game wants you to do with no room for deviation on your part, no variables that can make things interesting somehow. It becomes homogenized and uninspired, and I don't like seeing games built this way. But I know some people do. It's comforting and convenient. To some people, this is ideal. Everything should be made this way, the intent being absolutely clear from the second you start playing, and nothing being out of the way or out of the ordinary. And I can't stand that. I think it's incredibly restrictive and limiting for game designers, and it stops them from being able to try out new things that might not always work, but are worth trying anyway. Things like Mario Sunshine, a very flawed but very endearing, memorable game that people love for all the nutty things it even had the audacity to attempt. This kinda goes back to what I was saying about grinding in part 5. Sure, grinding on rails in later games is safer and simpler, but it's more predictable, more repetitive, more by the numbers, and less demanding on the player. Grinding in SA2 doesn't always work, but I feel Sega's loosey-goosey way of doing things makes it interesting, and is what made it possible for them to cope with some really fun and inspired set pieces that make stages like Final Rush far more memorable than a lot of the grinding stretches in later games are. I can't speak for everybody, but I like games that are flexible and give you room for error, that make it possible for you to lose and fuck up in some crazy bullshit way you didn't see coming. Where things do go wrong sometimes, because it's a flawed beast. I think there is far more value in a mechanic or gameplay style that doesn't always work and isn't perfect but works well enough most of the time and can be really fun, than there is in a super refined mechanic that always works a certain way but doesn't really let you try doing anything interesting or daring or just different with it. And this is the key difference between the philosophy of games like Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 and games like Super Mario Bros. Wii. I'm sure people are going to scoff and say I'm foolish for gravitating towards games that play fast and loose and in their eyes are bad for it, but if they're fine with always playing a game a certain right way on its terms and never trying anything different, anything experimental, I think they're missing out. And I don't want to annoy anyone by doing this again, but I'm gonna let Shaymate take it from here for a few minutes where he talks about another Sega game and Sega's riskier, more arcadey mentality when it comes to most of their games, and how rewarding those risks can be if you have a little patience for games that are different.
A number of people, fans and otherwise, have become understandably distrustful of Sega's output. And this distrust seems to have taken on a life of its own. People are becoming distrustful of Sega's old games as well. Games that were previously accepted to be good or even great are now being reassessed. Channels like the GameGrumps and Pro Jared have ripped the pish right out of the Sonic Adventure titles, for example. In fact, I have seen more than one person claim that even the Mega Drive Sonic games were bad. So with all of this said, I think the question has to be asked, were Sega ever really any good? Well, I'd like to answer that question with another question. Why does nobody talk about Nights into Dreams anymore? So the first opportunity I had to play Nights was in 2012, when it was re-released on XBLA, PSN, and Steam. And honestly, I did not enjoy it. Nights' biggest shortcoming is its complete lack of conveyance. Even if you read the instructions, its rules and parameters are poorly defined, and my first experiences with the game were negative as a result. Let's start with a breakdown of the game's structure. The game begins with the player taking control of a child as they run around a 3D space. Almost immediately, they're mugged by a menagerie of bizarre creatures who steal their orbs and place them in these capsules. The player is bombarded with information as soon as they begin playing, but it's difficult to parse this information without having read the background material. The story itself is easy enough to get. These bad guys have taken your stuff and you want to get it back. But its relevance to the gameplay is more nebulous. Would you know, for example, that you have to collect 20 of these chips in order to open the capsule? And furthermore, would you know that you have to adopt an entirely different perspective and control scheme in order to get them? This is where Nights comes in. Touching Nights lets the player begin playing as them. At this point, the perspective and the controls completely change. The game adopts a 2D perspective, a timer begins, and Nights starts flying on a preset loop around the stage. The goal here is to collect 20 chips and crash into the Idea Capture in order to destroy it. Once the Idea Capture is destroyed, bonus time begins where the points are doubled. This lasts until the player touches the Idea Palace at the end of the lap, where they're graded on their performance and then punted onto the next loop. This process repeats itself 3 more times, and then Nights is taken to a boss level. Beating the boss more quickly results in a better point multiplier at the end. Can you see why I didn't like this at first? The game fails to communicate its rules and parameters to the player. In total, a level is made up of 3 separate sections and 2 separate control schemes. This setup is more complicated than your average game, where the goal is to reach the end of the level with a single control scheme. Both are completely valid approaches, of course, but Nights' rules aren't communicated clearly. There's no tutorial, and the game is so surreal and vibrant that there aren't many visual references to help the player understand what the objects do. For example, if the chips were keys and the Idea Palace had a padlock, it would look a lot worse, but I might be able to understand it better. The poor conveyance is compounded by the controls and perspective when flying. The controls are very sensitive. Nights will respond to even the slightest unintentional nudge on the analog stick. Furthermore, the camera is very close to Nights. Putting these both together then, it's very easy for the player to be blindsided by an obstacle that they had no hope of anticipating and little hope of dodging thanks to the sensitive controls. It results in Knights being somewhat difficult to get the hang of, and disrupts the pace of the game significantly. And speaking of disruptions, if the player runs out of time, they drop all of their chips and have to return to the end of the loop as the child. Another pace breaker in a game already full of them. And that was it for me. I enjoyed how the game looked and sounded, but all of these problems really put me off Knights. I didn't understand the level designs, and the game wasn't really helping me to. I found controlling Knights really awkward, and it was so short that I felt I didn't really have the time to get to grips with any of it. I put the game down as a flashy, style over substance affair that was indicative of a lot of Sega's output. For me, Mario deserved to win that round. Justice served, and case closed. Now, before you go saying anything about that conclusion, yes, I agree, I was doing Knights a tremendous injustice. Earlier this year, I was watching some gameplay footage online and decided that I would give the game another go. Like I say, I loved its style, and I so badly wanted to like it as a result. Happily, I did like it this time around. The game really clicked into place once I made a simple discovery. I was playing it incorrectly. You see, the structure of the game is actually slightly different to the one that I described. Once the player enters bonus time, so long as they have time left on the clock, they can simply skip the Idia Palace and keep doing laps. As your points are doubled in bonus time, what this means is that you want to spend as little time as possible destroying the Idia capture before spending as much time as possible doing laps. In essence, the time limit isn't there to get you to the goal as quickly as possible, the time limit is there to get you to score as many points as quickly as possible. As I replayed the laps, I began to notice that I was collecting chips more efficiently and wasn't getting blindsided by obstacles anymore. I began to perform paraloops to draw extra items in. I began to chain actions together, racking up more points in the process. I began to get the laps down in just a few seconds. It is wholly satisfying, gracefully ducking in and out of obstacles, threading the needle through giant rings, and paralooping around a big bunch of items for mad points. It is constant, jubilant exhilaration. The colourful graphics and joyful tunes, combined with the tension of seeing if you can whiz around just one last lap, really see this game go from 0 to 60 in an instant. When the game clicks, it's addictive, arcadey, and really, really exciting. There was a really vivid moment where, after getting my first A rank, I realised that joy was pumping around my veins rather than the usual mix of adipose and ennui. This is why I made such a big deal out of the poor conveyance. It very nearly cost me a game that I absolutely love now. All of the shortcomings I described can be seen as strengths once you understand the game's rules. For example, Knight's sensitivity becomes responsiveness once you're used to it. They're almost one-to-one with the analog stick. The close camera allows Knights to provide constant visual feedback to the player. Any adjustment to Knight's trajectory is instantly visible on the character model. There's a large joint around their waist. Knights' torso will change to show where the player is pointing, while their legs will trail behind them to show where the player has come from. While giving the player constant visual feedback, this also adds a lot of fluidity to Knights' movement. Of course, this design choice does come with the downside that the camera is too close to see what's coming a lot of the time. But as the player is replaying the laps, they begin to anticipate the obstacles. It's like doing laps in a racing game. Even if it's a new track, you can begin to learn it during your first playthrough. The game encourages its players to master it. To that end, emphasis was placed on replaying the game. An enormous amount of effort went into making the world and the characters appealing. Now, I think that the importance of appealing characters and an appealing world is often understated. But as I said, I wanted this game to be good because of those very things. Knights and the Dream World are the reasons that I returned to the game in the first place. They're the reasons that I am making this video. Knights themselves combines the serenity of an angel with the fun-loving nature of a jester. They tap into what I think is a very primordial and universal appeal, the one of flying when in a dream, which is a fun and serene experience. Combined with Knight's graceful movement, I think the appeal is apparent, and hopefully the player should want to replay the game to get to spend more time with this character, to experience the thrill of flying again. Knights is the kind of game that you're going to replay multiple times. You're not going to discover everything on your first playthrough. And doesn't that sound familiar? This is the thing with Sega. Whereas they might look like style over substance, I would instead argue that Sega's games, at their best, are style supplementing substance. More precisely, you have to master the substance to get the style. You can't make full use of Sonic speed the first time that you play, for example. You have to learn the intricacies of the physics and the level designs. You can't immediately master Gunstar heroes. You have to learn which control scheme works best with which weapon. You can't just fly Knights around like a madman on your first go. You have to learn where the items and the enemies are, and how to swiftly and accurately maneuver through them. For me, this approach creates a more intimate connection between the player and the game. The player has to drink in the level design in order to master it. By playing these environments over and over, navigating them a little better each time, they become familiar, and hopefully the player should become fond of them. This approach does mean that Sega games, at their best, are still often pretty short, and it also means that the games might not click with everybody. I mean, I've spent ages waxing lyrical about the classic Sonic games over in Sonic Spitball, but truth be told, I didn't really get them until after a couple of playthroughs. And of course, none of this is to say that other companies lack complexity. So, to answer the question that started this video, were Sega ever really any good? I would have to answer absolutely. Sega's background was in arcade games. In fact, the major selling point of the Mega Drive pre-Sonic was its ability to faithfully recreate arcade games. I am generalising a bit here, but in my experience, arcade games are shorter and promote mastery in order to get their player to keep pumping money into them for just one more try. And the mentality that informed these arcade games also informed Sega's console development. The reason I think people are suspicious of that nowadays is that they grew up with other systems, and thus never got to grips with these games' mechanics when they were younger. Kids, generally speaking, have more time for games, but less money to spend on games, so they're forced to play what they have, often to the exclusion of a lot of other stuff. For the Sega kids, this meant that they slowly unlocked the nuances of the games that they owned, and formed a close affinity with them. But when we, as adults with less time, more money, and a wealth of content vying for our attention, go back to experience the games we missed, I think there's at least the possibility that we dismiss them based on first impressions. Or maybe it's just me. I never grew up with these games, and like I say, Knights, Gunstar, and even classic Sonic took a while to click with me. And nowadays, I think I was doing those games a huge disservice.
Again, sorry for falling back on other people's videos like this, but I feel Shay put it really well and I didn't want to simply echo or parrot what he's already said. I'm sharing this with you because I want people who watch this video to see more than one perspective. If you have the time, I implore you to watch his videos and Roger and Luke's videos in full. Because you know, it's not like I agree with these guys on everything, and I don't have to. I don't want my calling out of other YouTubers to give that impression. But yeah, it's like Shay said, this is just Sega's way of doing things. This is just the way Sega's games are made. They are fast and loose, they are reckless and full of crazy risks and all over the place, and that's what makes them so good, or at least so fun at times. People like things like the Cheep Cheep level because they want the game to gently spoon-feed them what to do. They want everything to be immediately apparent from the get-go and to be over quickly and painlessly. That game should just be a comfortable way to kill a few minutes here and there, like squeezing a stress ball. Nothing you really have to go out of your way to master or get the hang of. Going by this mentality, you shouldn't have to get used to a game that's unusual or tricky. You shouldn't have to get a feel for it or ever be frustrated by having to play something more than once to understand it. They don't get the same payoff from getting a completely new experience after a while that people like me do. They want everything to be clear as crystal from the word go, no surprises. And I'm not trying to say that the more arcadey experiences are always the way to go, that all games should be made this way instead, throwing caution to the wind, but I do think it's a perfectly valid approach to designing games, and developers shouldn't be chastised for trying out unorthodox things just because they couldn't get it to work flawlessly the first time or because it's weird and not for everybody or whatever. This is Sonic's bread and butter, and it's messy. It just is, and that's why people can't stand Sonic sometimes. I said last time that Sonic Adventure 2's ranking system ties everything in that game together rather neatly and makes it a more effective arcade experience, with a huge emphasis on getting points for every little thing you do, making everything really matter. And it feels like this game is unusually carefully planned as far as Sonic games go. But people still dismiss it because the perfectly functional mechs and the somewhat bloated treasure hunting stages aren't what they wanted, and Sonic Team should have just known better than to even try them. And I think that's an awful mindset to have. If they adhere to that mindset of, oh, just don't do it because it's stupid and weird and it's gonna be bad, well then they wouldn't have made wonderful things like the Chow Gardens. And the people dismissing Sonic in its entirety, classics included, for not adhering to the very narrow, inflexible Nintendo way of thinking, and applauding the Sonic games that sort of downplay the more fast and loose Sonic-y elements like Sonic Colors in favor of more clean Nintendo-like design, the people who think that the only way the Sonic series can improve itself is by being as little like Sonic as possible and more like that nice boy Mario. You just don't get it. These games aren't made for that audience, and they shouldn't have to be. I like Mario, and I like Sonic, but I like them in very different ways for very different reasons. I don't jump into both series with the same mindset, and then suddenly get disappointed when a mindset that works fine for one game doesn't work for the other. I know that may seem a little hypocritical, seeing how much I've been talking about how sterile Mario's level designs can be in some cases, but don't get the impression that I don't still like these games, or that I want Mario to drop everything and start emulating Sonic to a T, since Sonic does have many faults. I just happen to have a foot in each camp, whereas a lot of people keep both of their feet firmly planted in one or the other, drawing battle lines. I'm just saying that what I go into a Sonic game looking for, I don't find here, and vice versa. I still see the value and beauty in games like these and appreciate how bold they are, all the risks they took, and all of the things that did end up working fine, and all the great moments they created that ended up paying off in the final product, because the payoff, at least for me, is worth the bullshit. And there is always going to be some of that, but I am willing to forgive a game's flaws so long as the good parts of the experience outweigh the lesser parts. However, I don't want anyone to make the mistake of assuming that I think Sonic is completely above criticism. I just think some of that criticism is misplaced, or at least overblown. But now we come to something completely different. I'm gonna switch gears and bring up something Clement said when he released a certain video. And while I may disagree with him on one point, take it away, Clement.
Boss fights, the games always have great art design and soundtracks to them. I cannot believe that people actually critique the levels in such a way that it's like, oh, here's the momentum doesn't work. Oh, why are there automated boost pads? All these dumb critiques for something that like any 5 or 6-year-old would just enjoy the games because it's why I liked Sonic 2. It's fast, it flows well, it's good, it's fun, it's Sonic. What is people's problem with the Dimps games? It always seems so stupid to me, you know?
Make no mistake, people. I love this video. I think it's a video that needed to be made. But I just gotta say, Clement, I don't appreciate calling things like, well, how the games work the stupidest shit. I do understand the point he's getting at, though, that a lot of the criticism is overblown, as I've said. Still, this brings me back to the positive things I said earlier about Pro Jared's case, you know? He's not obnoxious like some of these guys. Outright bashing aside, a lot of the criticism people have thrown at certain Sonic games over the years, even recent ones, it doesn't come from a place of hate, but concern. It's sort of like when you love someone and you really want to support them, but you just can't condone the stupid shit they do. Maybe people look at the games being released, and there's one that really makes them worry about the direction the series will take in the future. You've said that when games like Shadow and 06 came about, and pushed this whole, what if Sonic was in the real world shtick in our faces, you didn't want the series to go in that direction. And presentation be damned, yeah, people will look at the way certain games play, things that bug them in something that they otherwise enjoy overall, and wonder, what if this becomes a thing? What if Sonic Team pushes this until Sonic becomes all about this thing that I don't like about it? And so, of course, they understandably feel the need to push back, to deter Sonic Team from continuing down the wrong path and set them back on the right course by bitching about it. I'm guilty of this too, but it was only because I couldn't imagine games like Generations or Lost World being released at the time. Now that we live in a world where there are games like these, I can look at something like Rise of Lyric and brush it off as a speed bump, another misstep, big whoop. It doesn't bother me much because Sonic Team's track record has been pretty good in recent years, and I look forward to seeing whatever they whip up for Sonic's 25th anniversary, whether it be a new spin on the Avengers series or not resemble it at all. I don't think we'll ever enter another Dark Age like the one the series survived and left years ago, and I'm not so anal about things like physics and boosters and level design anymore like I was in 2009, 10 and so on, but I do think these things still matter. A lot. When I first played the Genesis games, I knew I liked them, sort of, but I couldn't articulate why, and I had the hardest time playing them. I couldn't make it past Springyard Zone, or Royal Ocean Zone, or Carnival Night Zone. There was something about these games that I just wasn't getting. It didn't sink in for the longest time because from what little prior experience I had with gameplay like the speed stages in Sonic Adventure 2, I got the wrong impression of how Sonic games played, and my younger self was just bum rushing it in the classics, and you can't play them that way. I was mindlessly trying to plow my way through these games like a fool, and it got my stupid ass killed many times. I didn't take the time to explore and look for extra items or try to use the shapes of the terrain to my advantage because, yeah, I dismissed things like Sonic's momentum as not being that important. But at its roots, when you strip all the fluff away, Sonic's gameplay is so simple, the idea of it is so simple, that changing the smallest thing even slightly, such as the way he runs, something you'll spend most of a typical Sonic game doing, well, the game is then demanding that the player approaches everything in the game differently, and for the more discerning players, yeah, that changes a lot in the long run, and not always for the better. This is something I stand by because, well, as soon as I started thinking about things like the physics, I was finally able to beat Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles, these games I had such a hard time with for years, over the course of a few afternoons. As soon as I realized that it was possible to do things like hit a badnik or an item box really hard to bounce super high, or tuck and roll down a slope to gain crazy speed, and use an opposite facing slope as a ramp to reach nooks and crannies I never knew existed, suddenly these games became much easier for me to clear, and yes, more fun, because I finally got it. That's how important things like the rather unique physics are. It finally clicked with me. I was finally able to understand how Sonic games were really meant to be played. Ones like these anyway. And I think that's why a lot of the more recent games have a much bigger focus on springs and boost pads and whatnot, because Sonic Team and Dimps and others know that a lot of kids are going to have the same experience that I had with the classic games, that they won't even be able to comprehend how Sonic works half the time. That's why they end up placing so many scripted events in the more modern games, especially the 2D ones. They're doing this to try to streamline an inherently pretty clunky experience and help stupid players like me along, by giving us a helpful little nudge to keep us going because they can't trust us to do it ourselves. Players like me created these problems, and then we had the gall to chastise the game's creators for trying to fix them for us, for trying to accommodate us by improving the design. And sure, their attempts to find new ways to meet us halfway may be a little misguided, but it's only just now, as I'm writing this script down, that I've realized all this, that I've even started thinking about it from that point of view. Once players like me do get a decent grasp of the physics and whatnot and all the things you can use them to do, suddenly playing the more booster-heavy games feels weird to us. We look at some of these boosters and wonder why they're there, think them unnecessary and strange, and don't like it when the game steals the controller away from us. And sure, it usually only lasts for a moment, but the more of these things you put in the game, the less time the player spends actually playing it, and not just watching Sonic do things on his own, and the less of the game's outcome is truly in their hands in the long haul. The player wants to be in control of the game all the time. They just do. My point is, these kinds of things people talk about aren't stupid. They are worth talking about. They always matter. They always will. They can make or break a Sonic game for some people. That said, I've tried to be a little less crazy about the fine art of game design lately and a little more laid back, because I've seen what it does to people, to obsess about that kind of thing. It gets to a point where you just have a hard time really having fun with a game anymore because you tell yourself that it's not okay, that I should be better than that, I should be above this, because you get too focused on looking for flaws that may not be immediately apparent. Well, not you, of course, but you know who. How many times has Aaron had a terrible experience on GameGrumps because he can't stop approaching most games like he's a playtester hired to look for bugs for just a damn minute and breeze through the game like normal instead of fighting it every step of the way for the lulz? Recently, I replayed most of the Jak and Daxter games. When I got to the mission in Jak 2 where you have to throw bombs into all the Dark Ego wells at the strip mine to blow up the place, I was hoverboarding around and at one point, I brushed against a particularly janky wall and slipped through and fell out of the game. That's basically a death sentence for a Sonic game, but whenever it happens in a purportedly airtight game like Mario or Jak and Daxter, people tend to be much more forgiving about that sort of thing, because you see, it's not cool to shit on these games like it is when it comes to even the best Sonic games. Now that I think about it though, there are probably dozens or even hundreds of unstable areas just like that all throughout these seemingly perfect games, and if I did take the time to push against every wall or awkward corner just to see what might happen, I would probably fall down a lot. Games like these are really only as bad as you want them to be, and if you go out of your way looking for things to complain about, you're going to find them. And Sonic is under constant scrutiny now, so people are always finding new ways to say these games are just badly designed, full of bad ideas, including the classics that Clement and Shay and I love so much, even if we appreciate them in slightly different ways and for marginally different reasons. That said, while I don't think people should keep looking for reasons to decry Sonic altogether, I do think we can always look for ways to improve Sonic. With so many different games, all these different playstyles that have been created over the years, there's always some way to make Sonic better, and I don't think we should discourage that type of discussion from being had. I mean, this is why great series like Sonic Dissected have come about, and I hate seeing content like that dismissed as bitching or nitpicking, as happens sometimes. I don't think people should stop thinking about things like momentum and scripted events because underneath the rings and everything else, this is Sonic's thing, running. That's a very simplified understanding of it, yes, but it rings true. But you know what? All that bitching over the years, it kinda paid off. Fans asked for Sonic to be faster, so they gave us Sonic Unleashed daytime stage gameplay. It was a start. Despite my feelings towards Unleashed, I won't pretend it wasn't an incredibly important first step to getting Sonic back on his feet, and things only got better from there for a time. Fans asked for a game made entirely of daytime stage gameplay, so Sonic Team gave us Sonic Colors. Sonic fans asked for classic Sonic and more adventure-esque 3D gameplay to come back, so Sonic Team gave us Sonic Generations. Fans want Super Sonic to be playable in the normal levels and not just the final boss fight. Well, now you can do that in Colors, Generations, and Lost World. I find it hard to believe that these people could get it so wrong with games like Shadow in 06 and then just somehow bounce back on their own. Just certainly know better, if they weren't listening to and being informed by the fans. They know what we want now, and that's why Sonic's been in a pretty good place in the years since Clement started his big Sonic marathon. Even with as many subsections of the Sonic fanbase as there are, all these different people with their own ideas of what Sonic is supposed to be or what he has the potential to be that make it seem almost impossible to please everyone, there are some things we all like. We all like to see Sonic run and jump and collect rings and bounce off enemies and look good doing it. Just imagine where Sonic would be if we didn't tell the developers what we wanted out of his games. I can only hope that our constructive critiques end up sinking in more than the undeserved bashings that Sonic gets from the latter YouTubers nowadays and their bloated fan bases. Anyway, just to make things clear, while I may disagree with Clement's one sentiment, I am not putting him on the spot like these other guys have been calling out in almost every other part of this series. If anything, I owe him a lot and I'm kind of about to pay tribute to him. I'm just saying I don't think we should lean too far in either direction, bashing everything like some do, or dismissing constructive criticism as silly, as is easy to do as well. I appreciate Clement going through so much trouble to play and record every single Sonic game ever made over the years and showing them through his eyes. It was a daunting task, that's for sure, and it took a long time, and it's not over yet, but considering what he set out to do 6 years ago now, I'd say he's done good. I think you contributed a lot to improving Sonic's image over the years, Clement, more than any other one Sonic fan I've ever come across on the internet has, and you've helped other series along the way, like Mega Man Legends and relative unknowns like Fear Effect. I have no doubt in my mind that your videos and your just take it easy guys kind of attitude have resonated with people, and maybe even developers, providing a nice counterbalance to all the rampant negativity that only seems to be increasing with each passing year in Sonic's case, and having a tangible impact on the fates of some of these franchises. Sonic Adventure 2 is probably the closest example for me. I have a lot more respect for this game now than I used to because I see the joy that the game gave you, and because of that I was able to remember the joy the game gave me for a time, before I started obsessing about all this game design fiddle-faddle. It's not perfect, no Sonic game is, but it's something special. Heck, this video and the last one have basically become a tribute to your channel because a lot of the things I've said about Sonic Adventure 2 this time are things that I only took the time to think about really hard years after making my old review. Things that I only got thinking about again after taking another look at this game, what, 2 years later? Almost 3 when you start uploading your LP? And yeah, it's a pretty cool game. You've made Sonic Adventure 2 for me, and probably others. I have no doubt this series of videos would not have wound up being as good or informative or interesting as people say it is if it weren't for guys like you and Shay and Roger and Luke inspiring me to join you and stand up for these games. Anyway, thank you, Clement. As different as we are, I'm not afraid to say you've probably had a bigger influence on my videos than most YouTubers have, at least the Sonic-related ones, and it might not be apparent to people, but I feel it. But I don't want to come off as a Clement dick sucker specifically. I'm also going to give shoutouts to a few other people while I'm at it. First, there's of course Roger and Luke with their Sonic Dissected series, there's Shay May, and then there's Matthew Matosis. See, these guys have inspired me in recent years to really look at everything interesting about a game, showing me that nothing is beneath taking the time to talk about, that nothing is insignificant, and it's okay to look at the little things without it being dismissed as nitpicking or wasting time. There's also Ross of Accursed Farms. He's the guy behind Ross's Game Dungeon and Freeman's Mind. I love how off the wall this guy's presentation is in his reviews. Even the more underplayed ones make me laugh more than most game reviews, making them some of my favorites on YouTube. And he's had a big influence on my recent videos, as some of you may be able to see now looking back. There's the tangents where I get real, the bits where I'm seemingly aloof and sort of make fun of myself for even being here, there's the tone of my voice, and even just taking a minute here and there to talk about things that I like that may not even matter to anyone else. The success of his videos show me that it's okay to do that you can get away with being more real and down to earth and making reviews this way while still having a clear message. For all my talk about what people should expect from reviewers, I'm done trying to maintain any veneer of being professional with my game reviews. I'm just gonna do and say whatever the hell I want no matter how silly it sounds, because hey, judging from the way these Sonic Riri videos have been received, I'd say it's worked pretty well so far. I admit, I did go a little overboard with this series, and I don't plan on going quite this in-depth about anything ever again, otherwise I'd only be reviewing 1 or 2 games a year, but I'm going to embrace the tendencies that have made this series as enjoyable as it's been for you guys. Also, do give these other guys I've mentioned some of your time and check them out if you can. At this point, my style's sort of become a mix of all of these other guys, so if you like my videos, you'll probably like theirs. I also want to give a shout out to Exo Paradigm Gamer. He makes great Sonic reviews too, and he's been tackling the adventure games at the same time as I have, even finishing just a short while before I did with this. And it's funny how many of the same things we both noticed, like the waist swivel thing. I think it's quite fortunate that we both happen to stand up for these games simultaneously, our combined voices being more powerful than we are alone. And he's apparently been keeping up with these videos too, even giving me shouts in a lot of his own recent videos. So I'm pretty flattered, as you can imagine. So if you still haven't heard enough about Sonic Adventure to satisfy your own sick fascination with these games, you can go watch his videos too. Also, I kinda want to apologize to Aaron Hansen for how harsh I've been over the years, and especially in these recent videos. I don't want anyone to think that I actually hate this guy. I just think he says really dumb shit sometimes, and I feel the need to oppose the ignorance that could spread because of it. Truth be told, if I lived out that way and was ever offered a chance out of the blue to do a Grumpcade or whatever, I'm not gonna pretend I'd say no. We would just fight a lot. I don't have to agree with him on everything like a suck-up. I also won't completely rule it out that he may have triggered this glitch on purpose to make the game look bad because he's a troll. And last but not least, I'm giving a shout out to Anon7906. Most of the single-player footage from both adventure games you've seen throughout these videos was recorded by him, and is some of the best footage of these games I was able to find on YouTube. So thanks a lot for making these reviews that much more possible, Anon. I don't even know where I was going with this video. I've already said pretty much everything I could about these games individually in the other parts. I just had a lot of extra little things I wanted to look over and thought I'd make a thing out of it. Just one more video, you know? I know this one has been all over the place, but I hope most of you at least got something meaningful out of it, or that at least I was able to bring some other content creators to your attention that you might like. These videos were fun to make. They were also pretty stressful and mentally exhausting to put together, and I'm glad to be done with them, but I feel it was worth it. You guys have kept me going, and this Riri series has clearly resonated with you and started some really good conversations, and I'm glad there are people like Exo and Clement and so on and their fans also willing to stand up and defend Sonic. Hopefully this is the last time I'll ever have to talk about the Adventure series. We'll see. And thank you all for sticking with me since 2008. Maybe later this year there'll be some wicked new Sonic release to make a video about. Until then though, I'll just carry on as I have been, and I hope you guys continue to stick with me through that. Next I'll release 2 videos of Bionicle's 2016 Winter Wave, so you people can stop asking about that. And my next game review will be 3 for 1, as we look at the Metroid Prime Trilogy Collection. When Clement like that. Stay true and blue and whatever. Toodles for now, peeps. Now I can finally clear all this shit out of my hard drive.